The Washington Grand Ballroom, the Liberty Hotel, was humming with tonight's eagerly awaited American Honor Gala is a yearly occasion designed to honor first responders who are veterans and individuals who had devoted their lives to serving their nation. The list of guests was crowded with military and political figures, journalists, celebrities, and officials, everyone anticipating the main event. At the two women from the center of attention were entirely distinct worlds. Karoline Leavitt and Karoline were a political rising star renowned for her unrepentant attitude toward patriotism and national ideals. In spite of her youth, she had already developed into a powerful person in Washington who is much admired and hated by those who thought she was too Karoline brave for her own good. Conversely, a basketball legend was one of her most renowned athletes. She had gone beyond sports in this generation, being an inspiration to millions of people. Unquestionably talented, but what made her capacity to motivate was genuinely exceptional. To represent something more than simply the two women's game had never anticipated to come into contact in such a public setting, but both of them were asked to receive recognition for their contributions to American society. And for Karoline, leadership was all about her work supporting veterans and resisting those who attempted to remove. Karoline's national identity was about use her position to advocate for military families and fallen heroes. The lights went down as the event got underway, and the audience heard the national anthem. In unison, they rose to their feet, and some others' hands covering their hearts embraced them in quiet awe. Karoline took a seat in the front row. A folded American flag is handed over in, the one that had been placed on her lap. Family during the World War, when her grandfather, the second veteran, was no longer with us. This flag was made of more than simply fabric. It represented the sacrifice of all that her folks had struggled to keep Karoline from taking the stage next. A warm-up jacket was worn by other honorees, inscribed with the phrases, "Respect the fallen," in honor of those who had contributed their service careers. It was a straightforward gesture that she had already made at charity games, but this one had a weight that she had not expected. The whispers concluded. The anthem began by zooming in on the tension. One of the well-known media moved into the room. The VIP table is occupied by personality. Abruptly sprang to his feet and spoke loudly enough so that everyone in the room can hear. Karoline. According to some, Karoline, these symbols symbolize a history that separates us instead of brings us together in the modern world. Isn't it time? We don't cling to it. We go on. Out-of-date notions of patriotism sliced like a sword through the air. Others in the audience nodded in agreement, looked at each other awkwardly a few of times. Reporters grinned, already detecting a headline. Kate's head twitched a little. Their gazes briefly contact as they approached Karoline. For a split second, they both knew precisely what was taking place. This wasn't a doubt that it was a trap, and they now had a decision to hold the room's breath while awaiting their reply. Karoline stood with the folded flag slowly. She continued to hold her expression was still composed, yet there was she glanced with a calm fire in her eyes, straight at the reporter, who had uttered in a steady, unflinching voice, "I gave this flag to my grandfather's family as a parting tribute to his service. It is not political, nor is it out of date. Declaration that serves as a reminder of sacrifice, of duty on the amount paid. So everyone may be here without restriction tonight." A murmur spread as we spoke our minds. Some people in the audience nodded in agreement, while some said nothing. The journalist grinned, obviously unconcerned. "That's one perspective," he added, "but do you not believe that in the modern world, patriotism ought to focus more on diversity as opposed to emblems from the..." Some may argue that clinging to the past, that flag and similar items cause more harm. Better yet, Karoline didn't flinch, firmly grasped the flag, and took a step forward. Patriotism is not exclusionary. Rather than being a relic, it's the exact element that makes this possible for us. Discussion, and whether paying tribute to those who have sacrificed themselves for this nation is viewed as detrimental, then maybe the actual. The path is the issue, not the sign. We've learned to recognize the strain. The journalist became thicker in the room. He obviously turned to face Caitlin, anticipating that she will turn away from the controversy. You're an athlete. Your career, Caitlin, depends on sponsorships, public support, and endorsements. Are you truly interested in becoming entangled in anything so divisive? Cyan may have. She may have said, play it safe. Something neutral, something hazy. Something that wouldn't cause any agitation. Rather, she moved toward Karoline. The first game of basketball, since I adore. She mentioned the game, but I also adore this nation, and I adore those who have granted me the chance to play it. This jacket is a representation of that. If that's contentious, perhaps we need to inquire as to why a whispered whisper spread. The reporter folded through the crowd. Your statement is that his arms are not impressed. You don't give a damn about what other people think. Decipher these signs that represent their suffering. Regardless, Caitlin gave a slow. She said, breathe what I'm saying. With caution, is that respecting the sacrifices made by our predecessors doesn't take away from the difficulties we continue. We must face the fact that we can accomplish both today. Recall our origins and continue to strive for a better future by doing such things. Are not diametrically opposed. Rather, they have a. There was only silence for a moment, and then from a sound pierced the front row. Give a distinguished veteran a slow, thoughtful clap. One of the evening's honorees had. When he stood up, he was a man in his posture is still upright in his late 70s. Despite the year's burden, he examined Karoline, followed by Caitlin, then at last I battled for our country as a journalist. With a forceful yet measured tone, he said, I'll tell you that I lost friends because of it. I see young folks like them like this, standing up for their convictions. See the room with hope instead of division. Moved those who had been on the fence now, one by one, joined in the applause. Started to get up from their chairs till almost half of the space was standing. Everyone applauded, but some others stayed seated. Some whispered to one another. Reporters typed furiously in preparation. Their spin, but Karoline, it made no difference. And nobody had noticed what Caitlin had done. Anticipated that they wouldn't give up, and now, the whole nation was going to observe. Following that, the applause swelled. Cameras flashed in all directions, catching the instant as it happened. No longer merely a verbal exchange, it was a declaration or a turning point that would soon be examined, discussed, and the media's distortion of Karoline and Caitlin remained steadfastly beside her. The voice of the veteran continued to echo in their thoughts, reaffirming the truth of what they hadn't planned. They had just done it. They hadn't looked for controversy with this, but there was no going back inside now. Minutes, videos from the internet exploded. The event quickly gained popularity, was posted, and Resh posted news on all platforms. Media outlets rushed to report on the incident, but each provided a unique account of the narrative. Some depicted Karoline and Caitlin as courageous individuals advocating for their convictions, but others frame them as careless, polarizing, and outside of touch. TV pundits didn't spare any. Analyzing the moment in time on one station, a prominent political pundit shook his head in shock as the video. He looked to the music playing behind him. Cameras sighing. We must inquire. What message are they actually trying to convey to us? Is this a patriotic message, or it's about causing conflict during a gathering intended for unity? A competing network conducted a. The host took a completely different stance. Forward-looking eyes that flare with conviction. People are fed up with hearing that they have to express regret for being patriotic. Tonight, we witnessed two young ladies refusing to be silenced by bullying. That's bravery, not controversy. However, the story in the media wasn't the Veterans are the only ones taking shape. Groups, military families, and social media was overrun by regular people, with encouraging messages they exchanged, their own narratives and explanations for. The words and the flag pay tribute to the fallen, signified more than just a political discuss with parents who lost sons, and pictures were posted by daughters in service, acknowledging Karoline and Karoline for rising when so many others have fallen back. Swift was the backlash at the same moment. Among the harshest were Karoline's sponsors. The first to respond, some people were wary. Declarations pertaining to the respect of all opinions. Others remained mute and refused to. Several people were obviously shaken to comment at all. By the commotion, they began to think twice. Negotiations Karoline had to make behind closed doors. Pressure from a different front. Political leaders who had previously, they cautiously kept their distance from her. To avoid becoming entangled in the storm, some quietly warned her to be cautious around other people in public. Chastised her, saying she had changed turning a somber occasion into a show in the interim. Reporters combed through historical interviews in an effort to find whatever they could utilize to support their selected articles, with narratives started to appear with headlines that wonder if Karoline had put her whole career at danger in one. At night, some concentrated on her reaction to. They examined the journalist's query, her remarks discussing if she had alienated her fanbase, according to rumors regarding Karoline's intentions, implying that she had fabricated the incident for political purposes. Suddenly, the dispute had taken on a life of its own. 3 days following the gala on its own. At last, Karoline and Karoline conversed in private. They were both dragged into a whirlwind in which neither had completely ready for, but as they took a seat opposite one another, there was no, with remorse in their eyes, they desired that we fold. Karoline leaned back in her chair and said they believed that the strain would be too much. Karoline nodded a lot because she had spent years addressing the demands of the world of sports, but nothing was comparable to the Gaia following Firestorm. But she was convinced of one thing: if she had the opportunity to repeat it, she wouldn't alter a thing, in my opinion. If standing up for something, she said, puts you in danger, then perhaps it was worthwhile to defend in the first place. Commentators outside the noise continued controversial headlines, but at that table, Karoline and Karoline had already reconciled. They had defended something in their imaginations greater than themselves know of how. Despite their best efforts, the media wasn't about to express regret for the controversy, refused to stop the media from making their conclusion that this battle was worthwhile, milking for the sake of ratings. And Karoline, they weren't going to leave Karoline alone. Karoline's agency called her shortly, pushing her to do so 3 times in one day, to soften her, offer a neutral statement, position prior to her losing additional sponsorships. A few brands were already retreating, while others were assessing their relationship with her. Some even had began discreetly extending offers to other athletes in the event that Karoline turned into. She listened despite the risk, but she was unmoved. But Karoline faced the political counterpart of the same issue that some close advisors suggested that she send out a well-crafted, saying anything ambiguous about being aware of all viewpoints that could lessen the criticism that others weren't, is subtle and could negatively impact your future. Before something gets out of hand, you must go on. Even worse, Karoline had heard those remarks. She wasn't as afraid of them previously. They were told to apologize by others. As it became more apparent, this wasn't about patriotism, was no longer even about. For them, it was all about making. Yes, nobody, no matter how strong, could publicly contest the media's hold over the story with no repercussions, but there was something going on that the media hadn't relied as heavily as they did. The dispute, as much as they attempted to portray Karoline and Karoline as careless or erroneous, public opinion wasn't adjusting their expectations for veterans. Groups persisted in contacting and speaking out the athletes who are subjected to unfair standards from. Some other sports expressed their support. Honestly and hesitantly, a popular video. The montage displayed historical occurrences of American leaders and athletes standing for their nation, making analogies to the tide was against Caitlin and Karoline, changing, and then the time came when nobody anticipated a retired four-star. A general with significant clout went. During live TV, he wasn't merely an additional talking head, he leaned, but the country continued to listen. Forward, staring directly into the camera. Though calm, there was a hint of edge in his voice. I spent more than 30 years serving this nation. Years ago, I lost comrades in combat and I allowed. When I see let me tell you something. Young ladies advocate for what I perceive division, but I don't believe in bravery, and whether we've arrived at where respecting those who, then it is problematic to sacrifice for us. The issue lies with us, not with them. The host studio was silent, obviously taken by surprise, fumbled through a reaction, but the harm was already done. That clip spread more quickly than anything else. Then, all of a sudden, the entire conversation, news outlets that were altered in a matter of hours, had been critical of Karoline and Caitlin subtly changed their tone, revised earlier pieces, lightening their words that other people welcomed prospective visitors to. Those on their panels who were more kind, sponsors who had withdrawn oneself from Caitlin started to get close to. Yet more, their public relations team is rushing to recuperate from their rash choices. Some even made public declarations on supporting their athletes on Karoline's behalf. Political figures' retaliation began to wane. Certain politicians who had now criticized her obligingly sidestepped the topic. Everyone else who had stayed, suddenly, they were vocal, lauding her for her steadfast position. At the week's conclusion, the storm had not just passed, it had caused the media to backfire, had attempted to steer the story. Rather, they were revealed for what they were. Caitlin and Karoline simply defended themselves after winning. And when they entered their subsequent together, they both made a public appearance, knew with certainty that they would never again be mute. Karoline and, in addition to surviving the hurricane, Caitlin, they were stronger than ever when they came out. The media previously believed they could enforce a repentance or an apology had undervalued the influence of conviction. The more they attempted to construct the narrative, the more people saw, the more contentious. Karoline's manipulation went back to work with greater clout. More than ever, her unwillingness to bend had strengthened her standing as a leader who would not be influenced by the very individuals who had previously suggested that she be quiet were now complimenting her on Caitlin's unwavering print values. Even though Fallout first discovered that her following had only increased, the number of sponsors who had faltered were swapped out for new brands that placed a high importance on genuineness out of practicality. And when she stepped, returning to the ovation court, she obtained from the audience informed her all the information she required to understand the controversy intended to shatter them, only elevated them to legendary status as they split up after their subsequent public occurrence. Caitlin faced Karoline with I suppose we're having trouble with ERS now. Karoline chuckled. We were from the beginning. They simply failed to anticipate it. The reporters continued to follow them on camera, attempted to rewrite the story, but it was unsuccessful. No longer mattered, as the reality had already said, and nobody was able to return it.